Hollywood didn't lose audiences, it ignored them.
Hollywood once sold escape. For decades, audiences walked into darkened cinemas to forget the world outside. Politics, stress, division, daily life. For 2 hours, none of it mattered. Today, something has changed. The stories feel different. The tone feels different. And the audience reaction feels different. Not louder. Quieter. Because the shift is not only happening on screens, it's happening around them. In interviews, on red carpets, on social media, at award ceremonies. A place that used to offer relief from the culture war is now, increasingly, a front line inside it. And when that happens, audiences don't always argue. They don't always complain. They don't always boycott. Most of the time, they simply leave. This is not a story about censorship. It is not a story about whether any celebrity has a right to speak. They do. It is not even a story about left versus right, or which side is correct. This is a story about incentives, about how mass entertainment works, about what happens when an industry built to unite strangers starts behaving like an activist movement, and about how the numbers, quietly and relentlessly, tell us the audience is paying attention, even when it says nothing. If you want to understand Hollywood's anxiety, you don't start with tweets. You start with receipts. Because the modern film industry is not funded by applause. It is funded by tickets. In 2019, domestic box office revenue in the United States and Canada was about $11.36 billion. That was the last normal year. Then 2020 arrived. Domestic revenue collapsed to roughly $2.11 billion, an 81% drop. Now, some of that was unavoidable. Theaters closed, schedules collapsed, the entire world changed. But what matters is what happened next, because 2020 was not just a pause. For many people, it was a break. A habit was interrupted. And once a habit is broken, you don't automatically get it back. In 2021, domestic box office recovered to about $4.48 billion. In 2022, it climbed to roughly $7.37 billion. In 2023, it reached around $8.91 billion. In 2024, most industry tallies placed domestic around $8.7 billion. And in 2025, early year-end estimates put the domestic total close to $8.87 billion. Better, but not recovered. Even after years of rebound, Hollywood remains roughly $2.5 to $3 billion per year below 2019. That gap is not abstract. It represents millions of tickets that were never bought again. Not postponed, abandoned. And those missing tickets have consequences, because studios did not reduce budgets in proportion. They reduced risk tolerance. Globally, the pattern is similar. The last pre-pandemic peak year, 2019, saw worldwide box office around $42.5 billion. By 2024, one widely cited estimate put global box office around $30 billion. That's a huge recovery from the worst years, but it is still a smaller world than 2019. And when the world gets smaller, every creative and marketing decision gets sharper. Studios become more nervous. Executives demand safety. Franchises become oxygen tanks. And anything that threatens broad appeal starts to look like a direct financial risk, including politics. Now, here's the key point. The box office decline is not caused only by celebrity politics. A serious documentary has to admit the full landscape. Streaming changed habits. Ticket prices rose. Home entertainment improved. Theaters consolidated. Release windows shifted. And audiences learned to wait. But the reason politics matters in this story is that it interacts with every one of those pressures. If the audience is already on the edge, if they already feel the cost is too high, if they already feel staying home is easier, then alienation matters more. Politics becomes a multiplier, not a single cause, a multiplier.
For much of Hollywood history, there was an unwritten rule. Be interesting, be talented, be charismatic, but stay broadly likable. Classic stars had distance. You saw them in films, in carefully managed interviews, occasionally in magazines. They were not in your pocket every morning commenting on the news. That distance created something essential: projection. Different people could see different things in the same performer. An icon is not just a person. An icon is a mirror. Mass entertainment depends on shared space. It does not require agreement. It requires tolerance. The cinema works best when the audience is mixed. Different ages, different backgrounds, different beliefs. The movie is a truce. 2 hours where everybody is allowed to sit down together, stop fighting, and watch the same story. That is the magic. But politics is the opposite of a truce. Politics sorts people into tribes. Then it demands loyalty. So when celebrities and studios fuse politics with entertainment, they don't add meaning. They shrink the room. In earlier eras, many stars were politically active. But the public did not experience that activism constantly. It was not an always-on identity. It was not a daily performance. And because the audience didn't feel constantly provoked, it could keep watching. Modern celebrity culture changed that. Not because politics existed, but because it became the main brand. The shift did not happen overnight. It arrived through several forces, and those forces reinforced one another. First, social media removed the filter. There are no gatekeepers now, no editor, no producer, no publicist buffer. A thought becomes a post becomes a headline, and algorithms reward intensity, not nuance. Outrage travels faster than context. Second, Hollywood became increasingly insular. Geographically concentrated, socially interconnected, culturally aligned. When most people around you share similar views, those views begin to feel universal. Pushback feels less like disagreement and more like hostility. And once disagreement feels hostile, the temptation is to escalate, to treat the audience like an enemy instead of a customer. Third, activism became status. In many creative spaces, certain political positions became a form of social currency. They signaled education, virtue, belonging, safety. And when activism becomes status, it becomes performative. Not because every activist is fake, but because the incentives reward performance. People speak not only to persuade, but to prove they belong. Fourth, silence became suspicious. Not posting was interpreted as a statement. Not joining the trend was treated as endorsement of the other side. This creates pressure, and pressure creates sameness. Everyone says the same thing, with the same phrases, at the same time, which means the public begins to hear a single voice. Not a chorus, a single voice. And that voice feels like an institution. Fifth, shared culture fractured. Audiences splintered into niches. The monoculture weakened. Entertainment became a battlefield of identity. And once identity enters the room,
the story becomes secondary. Everything is interpreted politically, even when it isn't. And finally, outrage became performance. Not only what you believe, but how loudly you display it. Anger becomes a currency. The hotter the take, the faster it spreads. This is not unique to Hollywood, but Hollywood is uniquely exposed because its product depends on mass appeal. Most people do not hate politics. They are exhausted by it. They already live inside it. Work, bills, school, news cycles, social tension. They open their phones and see it. They turn on the TV and see it. They go to work and feel it. Cinema used to be a refuge. Not forever, just for 2 hours. And when that refuge starts feeling like another lecture, people don't rage, they disengage. There is a psychological idea you can call the audience contract. When you buy a ticket, you are making a deal. You will give the film your attention. In return, the film will give you something. Escape, wonder, catharsis, thrill, beauty, laughter. But if the audience senses the deal has changed, if it feels like the film is trying to recruit them, or shame them, or test their loyalty, the deal breaks. And the simplest response is to stay home. This is why so many people say, "It's not that I disagree, I'm just tired." Because a tired audience does not want to fight. A tired audience wants relief. That's the difference between debate and entertainment. Debate asks you to take a position. Entertainment asks you to feel. And when entertainment becomes debate, it loses the advantage that made it mass culture in the first place.
The phrase Trump derangement syndrome is not a diagnosis. It is a cultural shorthand, a label used to describe a pattern: obsessive fixation, permanent moral emergency, no off switch. For years, some celebrities could not stop referencing Donald Trump. Unrelated interviews, award speeches, comedy segments, everything became existential. Everything became urgent. Now, you can dislike Trump. You can hate Trump. You can blame Trump for a great deal. The point here is not the politics. The point is the saturation. When a celebrity becomes politically saturated, they stop being an artist in the public mind. They become a political avatar. And avatars trigger instant tribal reactions, which means the audience no longer approaches their work as work. They approach it as a loyalty test. And loyalty tests are poison for broad audiences. Even people who agree politically can feel exhausted by constant moral panic, because moral panic demands energy. It demands attention. It demands participation. It demands outrage. And most people do not want to live in outrage. They want to live in stories. So when the celebrity ecosystem pushes outrage as a default tone, the audience begins to opt out, quietly. Studios understand risk instinctively. Modern blockbusters routinely cost between $150 and $250 million to produce. Marketing can add another $100 million. That means a single release can require hundreds of millions of dollars just to break even. In a smaller market, that is terrifying. So studios retreat. They choose brands that feel safe. Sequels, reboots, franchises, known characters, known worlds. Not because executives are creatively evil, because they are financially scared. Here's the problem. When studios retreat to franchises, the audience begins to treat movies like optional homework. Do I really need to watch the 8th chapter? And when the audience already feels that way, political fatigue becomes even more powerful. Because now the film is not a must-see event. It's a choice. One choice among hundreds. Streaming, games, YouTube, TikTok, sports, podcasts. So anything that makes a film feel stressful, divisive, or preachy pushes the audience toward easier options. This is why Hollywood can simultaneously claim politics doesn't matter, people are overreacting, and also behave as if politics matters a great deal. Because the industry understands something audiences often forget. You don't need to lose everyone. You only need to lose the margins. When you're already down billions from your peak, the margins are everything. So why do celebrities keep doing it? Because the incentives are upside down. Inside Hollywood, political signaling is rewarded. Applause, invitations, validation, a sense of moral purpose. Outside Hollywood, the response can be very different. Fatigue. But the applause is immediate, and the fatigue is delayed, which means the feedback loop lies. Likes feel like support, but likes do not sell tickets. And social media applause is not the same as mass audience approval. In many industries, customer feedback is direct. If you alienate customers, sales fall quickly, and you adjust. Hollywood is strange, because a celebrity can receive enormous social reward even while the audience quietly disengages. They can be celebrated inside the bubble while the market shrinks outside it. And the shrinking market is blamed on everything else. The economy, streaming, attention spans, TikTok, the weather, anything except the obvious possibility that people feel less welcome. The audience doesn't need to cancel anyone. They don't need to organize a boycott. They don't need to argue. They just stop paying. That's the quiet power of the market. It's not moral. It's not ideological. It's behavioral. If Hollywood wanted to regain broad trust, it would not require silence. It would require humility. A return to the idea that entertainment is a service, not a sermon. A recognition that millions of people with different beliefs need stories that don't treat them as enemies. And a willingness to build new stars who are not primarily online activists. Because a movie star used to be an invitation, not a warning label. This doesn't mean films can't have meaning. Great films always have meaning. But the best films explore. They don't recruit. They ask questions. They don't deliver verdicts. They treat the audience like adults. And adults do not like being lectured, even when they agree. Especially when they agree. Because agreement doesn't remove exhaustion. It can increase it. Hollywood didn't lose audiences overnight. It lost them slowly. By breaking the audience contract. By replacing escape with instruction. Ambiguity with certainty. Stories with statements. And the numbers reflect that shift, relentlessly. Because when audiences leave, they don't announce it. They simply stop watching.